we present Clouds of Witness by Dorothy L. Sayers. O, who hath done this deed? Othello. Chapter 1. Of his malice aforethought. Lord Peter Wimsey stretched himself luxuriously between the sheets provided by the Hotel Moritz. After his exertions in the unravelling of a Battersea mystery, he had followed Sir Julian Freke's advice and taken a holiday. He had felt suddenly weary of breakfasting every morning before his view over the Green Park. He had realised that the picking up of first editions at sales afforded insufficient exercise for a man of 33. The very crimes of London were over-sophisticated. He had abandoned his flat and his friends, and fled to the wilds of Corsica. For the last 3 months he had forsworn letters, newspapers, and telegrams. He had tramped about the mountains, admiring from a cautious distance the wild beauty of Corsican peasant women, and studying the vendetta in its natural haunt. In such conditions murder seemed not only reasonable, but lovable. Bunter, his confidential man and assistant sleuth, had nobly sacrificed his civilized habits, had let his master go dirty and even unshaven, and had turned his faithful camera from the recording of fingerprints to that of craggy scenery. It had been very refreshing. Now, however, the call of the blood was upon Lord Peter. They had returned late last night in a vile train to Paris, and had picked up their luggage. The autumn light filtering through the curtains touched caressingly the silver-topped bottles on the dressing-table, outlined an electric lampshade and the shape of the telephone. A noise of running water nearby proclaimed that Bunter had turned on the bath, hot and cold, and was laying out scented soap, as well as bath salts, the huge bath sponge, for which there had been no scope in Corsica, and the delightful fresh brush with the long handle, which rasped you so agreeably all down the spine. Contrast, philosophized Lord Peter sleepily, is life. Corsica, Paris, then London. Ah, good morning, Bunter. Good morning, my lord. Fine morning, my lord. Your lordship's bath water is ready. Thanks. Lord Peter blinked at the sunlight. It was a glorious bath. He wondered, as he soaked in it, how he would have existed in Corsica for long. He wallowed happily and sang a few bars of a song. In a soporific interval he heard the valet de chambre bringing in coffee and rolls. Coffee and rolls. He heaved himself out of a splash, towelled himself, enveloped his long, mortified body in a silken bathrobe, and wandered back. To his immense surprise, he perceived Mr. Bunter calmly replacing all the fittings in his dressing-case. "I say, Bunter, what's up? We're staying a fortnight, you know." "Excuse me, my lord, but having seen the Times, delivered here every morning by air, my lord, and very expeditious, I'm sure, all things considered, I made no doubt your lordship would be wishing to go to Riversdale at—" "Riversdale? What's the matter? Anything wrong with my brother?" For answer, Mr. Bunter handed him the paper, folded open at the heading. "Riversdale Inquest. Duke of Denver arrested on murder charge." Lord Peter stared at it as if hypnotized. "I thought your lordship wouldn't wish to miss anything, so I took the liberty—" "When is the next train?" "I beg your lordship's pardon. I thought your lordship would wish to take the quickest route, so I took it upon myself to book 2 seats in the Aeroplane Victoria. She starts at 11:30. Lord Peter looked at his watch. 10 o'clock. "Very well. Yes, you did quite right. Dear me. Poor old Gerald arrested for murder. Uncommonly worrying for him, poor chap. I always hated my being mixed up with the police courts. Now he's there himself. Lord Peter Wimsey in the witness box. Very distressing to the feelings of a brother. Duke of Denver, the dock. Worse still. Dear me. Well, I suppose one must have breakfast." "Yes, my lord. There's a full account of the inquest in the paper, my lord." "Yes. Who's on the case, by the way?" Mr. Parker, my lord. Parker? Well, that's good. Splendid old Parker. Wonder how he managed to get himself put on it. How do things look, Bunter? If I may say so, my lord, I fancy the investigation will prove very interesting. There are several extremely suggestive points in the evidence, my lord. Well, from a criminological point of view, I dare say it is interesting, replied his lordship, sitting down cheerfully to his café au lait. But it's deuced awkward for my brother, all the same, having no turn for criminology. What? Ah, well, they say, my lord, there is nothing like having a personal interest. The inquest was held today at Riversdale in the North Riding of Yorkshire on the body of Captain Dennis Cathcart, which was found at 3 o'clock on Thursday morning lying just outside the conservatory door of the Duke of Denver's shooting box, Riversdale Lodge. Evidence was given to show that the deceased had quarrelled with the Duke of Denver on the preceding evening, and was subsequently shot in a small thicket adjoining the house. A pistol belonging to the Duke was found near the scene of the crime. A verdict of murder was returned against the Duke of Denver. Lady Mary Wimsey, sister of the Duke, who was engaged to be married to the deceased, collapsed after giving evidence, and is now lying seriously ill at the lodge. The Duchess of Denver hastened from town yesterday, and was present at the inquest. Full report, page 12. Poor old Gerald, thought Lord Peter, as he turned to page 12. And poor old Mary. I wonder if she really was fond of a fellow. Mother always said not, but Mary never would let on about herself. The full report began by describing the little village of Riversdale, where the Duke of Denver had recently taken a small shooting box for the season. When the tragedy occurred, the Duke had been staying there with a party of guests. In the Duchess's absence, Lady Mary Wimsey had acted as hostess. The other guests were Colonel and Mrs. Marchbanks, the Honourable Frederick Arbuthnot, Mr. and Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson, and the dead man, Dennis Cathcart. The first witness was the Duke of Denver, who claimed to have discovered the body. He gave evidence that he was coming into the house by the conservatory door at 3 o'clock in the morning of Thursday, October the 14th, when his foot struck against something. He had switched on his electric torch and seen the body of Dennis Cathcart at his feet. He had at once turned it over and seen that Cathcart had been shot in the chest. He was quite dead. As Denver was bending over the body, he heard a cry in the conservatory, and looking up, saw Lady Mary Wimsey gazing out, horror-struck. She came out by the conservatory door, and exclaimed at once, "Oh, God, Gerald, you've killed him!" This was the rather sensational version printed in the Times. The following is from the amplified and annotated shorthand reports made at the time of the inquest by Mr. Parker. The coroner. "Were you surprised by that remark?" Duke of Devonshire. "Well, I was so shocked and surprised at the whole thing. I think I said to her, 'Don't look,' and she said, 'Oh, it's Dennis. Whatever can have happened? Has there been an accident?' I stayed with the body and sent her to rouse the house." "Did you expect to see Lady Mary Wimsey in the conservatory?" "Well, really, as I say, I was astonished all round. I don't know. I didn't think about it. Do you remember how she was dressed?" "I don't think she was in her pyjamas." Open brackets, laughter, close brackets. "I think she had a coat on." "I understand that Lady Mary Wimsey was engaged to be married to the deceased." "Yes." "He was well known to you?" "He was the son of an old friend of my father's. His parents are dead. I believe he lived chiefly abroad. I ran across him during the war. In 1919 he came to stay at Denver. He became engaged to my sister at the beginning of this year." "With your consent, and with that of the family?" "Oh, yes, certainly." "What kind of man was Captain Cathcart?" "Well, he was a sahib and all that. I don't know what he did before he joined in 1914. I think he lived on his income. His father was well off, crack shot, good at games, and so on. I never heard anything against him. Till that evening." "What was that?" "Well, the fact is, it was deuced queer. Well, if anybody but Tommy Freeborn had said it, I would not have believed it." Open brackets, sensation, close brackets. "I'm afraid I must ask your Grace what exactly it is you had to accuse the deceased." "Well, I didn't exactly accuse him. An old friend of mine made a suggestion. I thought it must all be a mistake. So I went to Cathcart, and to my amazement he practically admitted it. And then we both got angry, and he told me to go to the devil and rushed out of the house. Renewed sensation. When did this quarrel occur? On Wednesday night. That was the last I saw of him. Unparalleled sensation. Please, please, we cannot have this disturbance. Now, will your Grace kindly give me, as far as you can remember it, the exact history of this quarrel? Well, it was like this. We'd had a long day on the moors, had dinner early. About 9:30 we began to feel like turning in. My sister and Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson toddled on up, and we were having a last peg in the billiard-room when Fleming, that's my man, came in with the letters. They come at any old time in the evening, you know, we being 2.5 miles from the village. No. I wasn't in the billiard-room at the time. I was locking up the gun-room. The letter was from an old friend of mine, not seen him for years, Tom Freeborn. Used to know him in the house. Whose house? Christchurch, Oxford. He wrote to say he'd seen the announcement of my sister's engagement in Egypt. In Egypt? I mean, he was in Egypt. Tom Freeborn, was he? That's why he hadn't written before. He engineers. He went up there after the war was over, you see, and being somewhere up near the sources of the Nile, he doesn't get the papers regularly. He said, would I excuse him for interfering in a very delicate matter and all that? But did I know who Cathcart was? Said he'd met him in Paris during the war, and he lived by cheating at cards. Said he could swear to it, with details of a row they'd been in some French place or other. Said he knew I'd want to chew his head off, Freeborn's I mean, for butting in, but he'd seen the man's photo, and he really thought I ought to know. Did the letter surprise you? Well, I couldn't believe it at first. If it hadn't been old Tom Freeborn, I'd have put the thing on the fire. Even as it was, but I didn't know what to think. I mean, it wasn't as if it had happened in England, you know. I mean to say, Frenchmen get very excited about nothing. But there was Freeborn, and he's not the kind of man that makes mistakes. What did you do? Well, the more I looked at it, the less I liked it, you know. Still, I couldn't quite leave it like that, so I thought the best way was to go straight to Cathcart. They'd all gone up while I was sitting thinking about it, so I went up and I knocked at Cathcart's door. He said, "What's that?" or "Who the devil's that?" or something of the sort. I went in. "Look here, can I just have a word with you?" Well, cut it short then. I was surprised, for he wasn't usually rude. Well, fact is, I've had a letter I don't much like the look of. I thought best thing was to bring it straight in and have it out of you. Get the whole thing cleared up. It's from a man, a very decent sort, old college friend, who says he's met you in Paris. Paris? What the hell do you want to come here talking to me about Paris for? Well, don't talk like that, because it's misleading under the circumstances. What are you driving at? Spit it out and go to bed, for God's sake. Right-o, I will. It's a man called Freeborn, who says he knew you in Paris, and that you made money cheating at cards. I thought he'd break out at that, but all he said was, "What about it?" What about it? Well, of course, it's not the sort of thing I'm going to believe like that, like bang slap off, without any proofs. Beliefs don't matter. It's what one knows about people. Do you mean you're not denying it? No good denying it. You must make up your own mind. Nobody could disprove it. Then he suddenly jumped up, nearly knocking the table over, and said, "I don't care what you think or do, if you'll only get out. For God's sake, will you leave me alone?" Look here, you needn't take it that way. I don't say I do believe it. In fact, I'm sure there must be some mistake. Only you're engaged to Mary. I can't just let it go without looking into it. Oh, if that's what's worrying you, it needn't. It's off. What? The engagement. Off? But I was talking to Mary about it only yesterday. I haven't told her yet. Well, I think that's damned cool. Who the hell do you think you are to come here and jilt my sister? Well, I said quite a lot, first and last. You can get out, I said. I've no use for swine like you. I will. He pushed past me and slammed downstairs and out of the front door. It banged after him. What did you do then, your Grace? Well, I ran into my bedroom, which has a window over the conservatory, and I shouted out to him not to be a silly fool. It was pouring with rain and beastly cold. But he didn't come back. I told Fleming to leave the conservatory door open in case he thought better of it. Went to bed. What explanation can you suggest for Cathcart's behaviour? None. I am simply staggered. But I think he must somehow have got wind of the letter and knew the game was up. Did you mention the matter to anybody else? No, it wasn't pleasant. I thought best leave it till morning. So you did nothing further in the matter? No. I didn't want to go out hunting for the fellow. I was too angry. Besides, I thought he'd change his mind before long. It was a brute of a night, and he'd only a dinner jacket. Then you just went quietly to bed and never saw the deceased again? Not till I fell over him outside the conservatory at 3 a.m. Yes. Now, can you tell us how you came to be out of doors at that time? Well, I didn't sleep. I don't sleep well. I went out for a stroll. At 3 o'clock in the morning? Yes. You see, my wife's away. Laughter and some remarks from the back of the room. Silence, please. You mean to say you got up at that hour of an October night to take a walk in the garden in the pouring rain? Yes, just a stroll. At what time did you leave your bedroom? About 2:30, I should say. Which way did you go out? By the conservatory door. The body was not there when you went out? Ah, no. Or you would have seen it. Lord, yes. I'd have had to walk over it. Exactly. Where did you go? Oh, just around. You heard no shot? No. Did you go far from the conservatory door and the shrubbery? Well, I was some way off. Perhaps that's why I didn't hear anything. It must have been. Were you as much as 1/4 of a mile away? Oh, I should think I was, quite. More than 1/4 of a mile away? Possibly. I walked about briskly because it was cold. In which direction? Round the back of the house, towards the bowling green. The bowling green? Oh, yes. But if you were more than 1/4 of a mile away, you must have left the grounds. I think I did. Yes, I walked about on the moor a bit, you know. Can you show us the letter you had from Mr. Freeborn? Oh, certainly, if I can find it. I thought I put it in my pocket, but I could not find it for that Scotland Yard fellow. Can you have accidentally destroyed it? No. I'm sure I remember putting it... Oh. Here witness pauses in very patent confusion and grows red. I remember now, I destroyed it. Well, that is unfortunate. How was that? I had forgotten. It has come back to me now. I'm afraid it has gone for good. Perhaps you kept the envelope? I'm afraid not. Then you can show the jury no proof of having received it. Not unless Fleming remembers it. Ah, yes. No doubt we can check it that way. Thank you, Your Grace. Call Lady Mary, Whimsy. The noble lady who was, until the tragic morning of October the 14th, the fiancée of the deceased, aroused a murmur of sympathy on her appearance. Fair and slender, her naturally rose-pink cheeks ashy pale, she seemed overwhelmed with grief. She was dressed entirely in black, and gave her evidence in a very low tone, which was at times almost inaudible. After expressing his sympathy, the coroner asked, "How long were you engaged to the deceased?" "About 8 months." "Where did you first meet him?" "At my sister-in-law's house in London." "When was that?" "I think it was June last year." "You were quite happy in your engagement?" "Quite." "You naturally saw a good deal of Captain Cathcart. Did he tell you much about his previous life?" "Not very much. We were not given to mutual confidences. We usually discussed subjects of common interest." "You had many such subjects?" "Oh, yes." "You never gathered at any time that Captain Cathcart had anything on his mind?" "Not particularly. He had seemed a little anxious the last few days." "Did he speak of his life in Paris?" "He spoke of theatres and amusements there. He knew Paris very well. I was staying in Paris with some friends last February when he was there. He took us about. That was shortly after our engagement. Did he ever speak of playing cards in Paris? I don't remember. With regard to your marriage, had any money settlements been gone into? I don't think so. The date of the marriage was not in any way fixed. He always appeared to have plenty of money? I suppose so. I didn't think about it. You never heard him complain of being hard up? Everybody complains of that, don't they? Was he a man of cheerful disposition? He was very moody. Never the same 2 days together. You have heard what your brother said about the deceased wishing to break off the engagement. Had you any idea of this? Not the slightest. Can you think of any explanation now? Absolutely none. There had been no quarrel? No. So far as you know, on the Wednesday evening you were still engaged to the deceased, with every prospect of being married to him shortly. Yes, certainly, of course. He was not, forgive me this very painful question, the sort of man who would have been likely to lay violent hands upon himself? Oh, I never thought. Well, I don't know. I suppose he might have done. That would explain it, wouldn't it? Please, Lady Mary, don't distress yourself, and take your own time. Will you tell us exactly what you heard and saw on Wednesday night and Thursday morning? I went up to bed with Mrs. Marchbanks and Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson at about 9:30, leaving all the men downstairs. I said good night to Dennis, who seemed quite as usual. I was not downstairs when the post came. I went to my room at once. My room is at the back of the house. I heard Mr. Pettigrew Robinson come up about 10. The Pettigrew Robinsons sleep next door to me. Some of the other men came up with him. I did not hear my brother come upstairs. At about 10:15, I heard 2 men talking loudly in the passage. Then I heard someone run downstairs and bang the front door. Afterwards I heard rapid steps in the passage, and finally I heard my brother shut his door. Then I went to bed. You did not inquire the cause of the disturbance? I thought it was probably something about the dogs. What happened next? I woke at 3 o'clock. What wakened you? I heard a shot. You were not awake before you heard it? I may have been partly awake. I heard it very distinctly. I was sure it was a shot, and I listened for a few minutes, then went down to see if anything was wrong. Why did you not call your brother or some other gentleman? Why should I? I thought it was probably only poachers, and I didn't want to make unnecessary fuss at that unearthly hour. Did the shot sound close to the house? Fairly, I think. It's hard to tell when one is wakened by a noise. It always sounds so extra loud. It certainly did not seem to be in the house or in the conservatory. No, it was outside. So you went downstairs by yourself. That was very plucky of you, Lady Mary. Did you go immediately? Not quite immediately. I thought it over for a few minutes. Then I put on walking shoes over bare feet, a heavy covert coat, and a woolly cap. It may have been 5 minutes after hearing the shot that I left the bedroom. I went downstairs and through the billiard room to the conservatory. Why did you go that way? Because it was quicker than unbolting either the front door or the back. At this point a plan of Riversdale Lodge was handed to the jury. It is a roomy 2-storied house, built in a plain style, and leased by the present owner, Mr. Walter Montague, to Lord Denver for the season, Mr. Montague being in the States. When I got to the conservatory door, I saw a man outside, bending over something on the ground. When he looked up, I was astonished to see my brother. Before you saw who it was, what did you expect? I hardly know. It all happened so quickly. I thought it was burglars, I think. His Grace has told us when you saw him, you cried out, "Oh God, you've killed him." Can you tell us why you did that? I thought my brother must have come upon the burglar and fired at him in self-defence. If I thought at all. Quite so. You knew that the Duke possessed a revolver? Oh, yes, I think so. What did you do next? My brother sent me to get help. I knocked up Mr. Arbuthnot and Mr. and Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson. Then I suddenly felt very faint, and went back to my bedroom and took some sal volatile. Alone? Yes. Everybody was running about and calling out. I couldn't bear it. The witness, up until this moment, had given her evidence very collectively, though in a low voice, now collapsed suddenly, and had to be assisted from the room. The next witness called was James Fleming, the manservant. He remembered having brought the letters from Littleesdale at 9:45 on Wednesday evening. He had taken 3 or 4 letters to the Duke in the gun-room. He could not remember at all whether one of them had had an Egyptian stamp. He did not collect stamps. His hobby was autographs. The Honourable Frederick Arbuthnot then gave evidence. He had gone up to bed with the rest of them a little before 10. He had heard Denver come up by himself some time later, couldn't say how much later, as he was brushing his teeth at the time. He had certainly heard loud noises and a row going on next door and in the passage, had heard somebody go for the stairs hell for leather, had stuck his head out and seen Denver in the passage, had said, "Hello, Denver, what's the row?" The Duke's reply had been inaudible. Denver had bolted into his bedroom and shouted out of the window, "Don't be an ass, man!" He had seemed very angry indeed, but the Honourable Freddy attached no importance to that. One was always getting across Denver, but it never came to anything. More dust than kick, in his opinion. Hadn't known Cathcart long, always found him all right. No, he didn't like Cathcart, but he was all right, you know. Nothing wrong about him, that he knew of. Good Lord, no, he'd never heard it suggested he cheated at cards. Well, no, of course, he didn't go about looking for people who cheated at cards. It wasn't a thing one expected. He'd been had that way in a club at Monte once. He'd had no hand in bringing it to light. Hadn't noticed anything till the fun began. Had not noticed anything particular in Cathcart's manner to Lady Mary, no, or hers to him. Didn't suppose he ever would notice anything. Did not consider himself an observing sort of man. He wasn't interfering by nature. Had thought Wednesday evening's dust-up none of his business, and had gone to bed and to sleep. Did you hear anything further that night? Well, not till poor little Mary knocked me up, no. I toddled down, found Denver in the conservatory, bathing Cathcart's head. Well, we thought we ought to clean the gravel and mud off his face, you know. You heard no shot? Not a sound. But, do you know, I sleep pretty heavily. Colonel and Mrs. Marchbanks slept in the room over which was called the study, more a sort of smoking room, really. They both gave the same account of a conversation which they had had at 11:30. Mrs. Marchbanks had sat up to write some letters after the Colonel was in bed, and they'd heard voices and someone running about. They paid no attention. It was not unusual for members of the party to shout and run about. "Come to bed, my dear, it's 11:30. We're making an early start tomorrow. You won't be fit for anything." The Colonel said this because Mrs. Marchbanks was a keen sportswoman, and always carried her gun with the rest. "I'm just coming." "You're the only sinner burning the midnight oil. Everybody else turned in." "No, the Duke's still up. I can hear him moving about in the study." Colonel Marchbanks listened and heard it too. Neither of them heard the Duke come up again. They had heard no noise of any kind in the night. Mr. Pettigrew Robinson appeared to give evidence with extreme reluctance. He and his wife had gone to bed at 10. They'd heard the quarrel with Cathcart. Mr. Pettigrew Robinson, fearing that something might be going to happen, opened his door in time to hear the Duke say, "If you dare to speak to my sister again, I'll break every bone in your body." Or words to that effect. Cathcart had rushed downstairs. The Duke was scarlet in the face. He had not seen Mr. Pettigrew Robinson, but had spoken a few words to Mr. Arbuthnot and rushed into his own bedroom. Mr. Pettigrew Robinson had run out and said to Mr. Arbuthnot, "I say, Arbuthnot," and Mr. Arbuthnot had very rudely slammed the door in his face. He had then gone to the Duke's door. "I say, Denver." The Duke had come out, pushing past him without even noticing him, and gone to the head of the stairs. He'd heard him tell Fleming to leave the conservatory door open as Mr. Cathcart had gone out. The Duke had then returned. Mr. Pettigrew Robinson had tried to catch him as he passed, and had said again, "I say, Denver, what's up?" The Duke had said nothing, and shut his bedroom door with great decision. Later on, however, at 11:30 to be precise, Mr. Pettigrew Robinson had heard the Duke's door open, and stealthy feet moving about. He could not hear whether they had gone downstairs. The bathroom and lavatory were at his end of the passage, and if anybody entered either of them, he thought he would have heard. He had not heard the footsteps return. He heard his travelling clock strike 12 before falling asleep. There was no mistaking the Duke's bedroom door, as the hinge creaked in a peculiar manner. Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson confirmed her husband's evidence. She had fallen asleep before midnight and had slept heavily. She was a heavy sleeper at the beginning of the night, but she slept lightly in the early morning. She had been annoyed by all the disturbance in the house that evening, as it had prevented her from getting off. In fact, she dropped off at about 10:30, and Mr. Pettigrew Robinson had had to wake her an hour after to tell her about the footsteps. What of one thing and another, she only got a couple of hours' good sleep. She woke up again at 2, and remained broad awake till the alarm was given by Lady Mary, and she could swear positively that she heard no shot in the night. Her window was next to Lady Mary's, on the opposite side from the conservatory. She had always been accustomed from a child to sleep with her window open, and in reply to a question from the coroner, Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson said she had never felt there was a real true affection between Lady Mary Wimsey and the deceased. They seemed very off-hand, but that sort of thing was the fashion nowadays. She'd never heard of any disagreement. Miss Lydia Cathcart, who had been hurriedly summoned from town, then gave evidence about the deceased man. She told the coroner that she was the captain's aunt, and his only surviving relative. She had seen very little of him since he came into possession of his father's money. He had always lived with his own friends in Paris, and they were such as she could not approve of. My brother and I never got on very well, and he had my nephew educated abroad. He was 18, and I fear Dennis's notions were always quite French. After my brother's death, Dennis went to Cambridge by his father's desire. I was left executrix of the will and guardian till Dennis came of age. I do not know why, after neglecting me all his life, my brother should have chosen to put such a responsibility upon me at his death, but I did not care to refuse. My house was open to Dennis during his holidays from college, but he preferred as a rule to go and stay with his rich friends. I cannot now recall any of their names. When Dennis was 21, he came into £10,000 a year. I believe it was in some kind of foreign property. I inherited a certain amount under the will as executrix, but I converted it all at once into good, sound British securities. I cannot say what Dennis did with his. It would not surprise me at all to learn that he had been cheating at cards. I have heard that the persons he consorted with in Paris were most undesirable. I never met any of them. I have never been in France. John Hardraw, the gamekeeper, was next called. He and his wife inhabit a small cottage just inside the gate of Riddlesdale Lodge. The grounds, which measure 20 acres or so, are surrounded at this point by a strong paling. The gate is locked at night. Hardraw stated that he had heard a shot fired at about 10 minutes to 12 on Wednesday night, close to the cottage, as it seemed to him. Behind the cottage are 10 acres of preserved plantation. He supposed that there were poachers about. They occasionally came in after hares. He went out of his gun in that direction, but saw nobody. He returned home at 1 o'clock by his watch. "Did you fire your gun at any time?" "No." "You did not go out again?" "No, I did not." "Nor hear any other shots?" "Only that one, but I fell asleep after I got back. I was wakened up by the chauffeur going out for the doctor. That would be about 3:15. "Is it not unusual for poachers to shoot so very near the cottage?" "Yes, rather. If poachers do come, it's usually on the other side of the preserve, towards the moor." Dr. Thorpe gave evidence of having been called to see the deceased. He lived in Stapley, nearly 14 miles from Riddlesdale. There was no medical man in Riddlesdale. The chauffeur had knocked him up at 3:45 a.m., and he had dressed quickly and come with him at once. They were at Riddlesdale Lodge at 4:30. Deceased, when he saw him, he judged to have been dead 3 or 4 hours. The lungs had been pierced by a bullet, and death had resulted from loss of blood and suffocation. Death would not have resulted immediately. Deceased might have lingered some time. He had made a post-mortem examination, and found that the bullet had been deflected from a rib. There was nothing to show whether the wound had been self-inflicted or fired from another hand at close quarters. There were no other marks of violence. Inspector Crakes from Stapley had been brought back in the car with Dr. Thorpe. He had seen the body. It was then lying on its back between the door of the conservatory and the covered well just outside. As soon as it became light, Inspector Crakes had examined the house and grounds. He had found bloody marks all along the path leading to the conservatory, and signs as though a body had been dragged along. This path ran to the main path leading from the gate to the front door, plan produced. Where the two paths joined, a shrubbery began, and it ran down on both sides of the path to the gate and the gamekeeper's cottage. The blood tracks had led to a little clearing in the middle of the shrubbery, about halfway between the house and the gate. Here the inspector found a great pool of blood, a handkerchief soaked in blood, and a revolver. The handkerchief bore the initials D.C., and the revolver was a small weapon of American pattern, and bore no mark. The conservatory door was open when the inspector arrived, and the key was inside. Deceased, when he saw him, was in dinner jacket and pumps, without hat or overcoat. He was wet through, and his clothes, besides being much blood-stained, were very muddy and greatly distorted from the dragging of the body. The pocket contained a cigar case and a small flat pocket-knife. Deceased's bedroom had been searched for papers, etc., but so far nothing had been found to shed very much light on his circumstances. The Duke of Denver was then recalled. "I should like to ask your Grace whether you ever saw the deceased in possession of a revolver?" "Not since the war." "You do not know if he carried one about with him?" "I have no idea." "You can make no guess, I suppose, to whom this revolver belongs?" "Well, that's my revolver. It's out of the study table drawer. How on earth did you get hold of it?" "You are certain?" "Positive. I saw it there only the other day when I was hunting out some photos of Mary for Cathcart. I remember saying it was getting rusty lying about. There's the speck of rust." "Did you keep it loaded?" "Lord, no. I really don't know why it was there. I fancy I turned it out one day with some old army stuff and found it among my shooting things when I was up at Whittlesdale in August. I think the cartridges were with it." "Was the drawer locked?" "Yes, but the key was in the lock. My wife tells me I am careless." "Did anybody else know the revolver was there?" "Fleming did, I think. I don't know of anybody else." Detective Inspector Parker of Scotland Yard, having only arrived on Friday, had been unable as yet to make any close investigation. Certain indications led him to think that some person or persons had been on the scene of the tragedy in addition to those who had taken part in the discovery. He preferred to say nothing more at present. The coroner then reconstructed the evidence in chronological order. At or a little after 10 o'clock there had been a quarrel between the deceased and the Duke of Denver, after which the deceased had left the house, never to be seen alive again. They had the evidence of Mr. Pettigrew Robinson that the Duke had gone downstairs at 11:30, and that of Colonel Marchbanks that he had been heard immediately afterwards moving about the study, the room in which the revolver produced in evidence was usually kept. Against this they had the Duke's own sworn statement that he had not left his bedroom till past 2 in the morning. The jury would have to consider what weight was to be attached to these conflicting statements. Then, as to the shots heard in the night, the gamekeeper said he had heard a shot at 10 minutes to 12, but he had supposed it to be fired by poachers. It was, in fact, quite possible there had been poachers about. On the other hand, Lady Mary's statement that she had heard the shot at about 3 a.m. did not fit in very well with the doctor's evidence that when he had arrived at Whittlesdale at 4:30, the deceased had been dead already 3 or 4 hours. They would remember also that in Dr. Thorpe's opinion, death had not immediately followed the wound. If they believed this evidence, therefore, they would have to put back the moment of death to between 11 p.m. and midnight, and this might very well have been the shot which the gamekeeper heard. In that case they had to ask themselves about the shot which had awakened Lady Mary Wimsey. Of course, if they liked to put that down to poachers, there was no inherent impossibility. They next came to the body of the deceased, which had been discovered by the Duke of Denver at 3 a.m. lying outside the door of the small conservatory near the covered well. There seemed little doubt from the medical evidence that the shot which killed the deceased had been fired in the shrubbery about 7 minutes' distance from the house, and that the body of deceased had been dragged from that place to the house. Deceased had undoubtedly died as a result of being shot in the lungs, and the jury would have to decide whether that shot was fired by his own hand or by the hand of another, and, if the latter, whether by accident, in self-defence, or by malice aforethought with intent to murder. As regards suicide, they must consider what they knew of a deceased's character and circumstances. Deceased was a young man in the prime of his strength and apparently of considerable fortune. He'd had a meritorious military career and was liked by his friends. The Duke of Denver had thought sufficiently well of him to consent to his own sister's engagement to deceased. There was evidence to show that the fiancés, though perhaps not demonstrative, were on excellent terms. The Duke affirmed that on the Wednesday night deceased had announced his intention of breaking off the engagement, and did they believe that deceased, without even communicating with the lady or writing a word of explanation or farewell, would thereupon rush out and shoot himself? Again, the jury must consider the accusation which the Duke of Denver said he had brought against deceased. He had accused him of cheating at cards. In the kind of society in which the persons involved in this inquiry belonged, such a misdemeanour as cheating at cards was regarded as far more shameful than sins such as murder and adultery. Possibly the mere suggestion of such a thing, whether well-founded or not, might well cause a gentleman of sensitive honour to make away with himself. But was deceased honourable? Deceased had been educated in France, and French notions of the honest thing were very different from British ones. The coroner himself had had business relations with French persons in his capacity as a solicitor, and could assure such of the jury as had never been in France that they ought to allow for these different standards. Unhappily, the alleged letter giving details of the accusation had not been produced to them. Next, they might ask themselves whether it was not more usual for the suicide to shoot himself in the head. They should ask themselves how deceased came by the revolver, and finally they must consider in that case who had dragged the body towards the house, and why that person had chosen to do so, with great labour to himself, and at the risk of extinguishing any lingering remnant of the vital spark, instead of arousing the household and fetching help. If they excluded suicide, there remained accident, manslaughter, or murder. As to the first, if they thought it likely that deceased or any other person had taken out the Duke of Denver's revolver that night for any purpose, and that, in looking at, cleaning, shooting with, or otherwise handling the weapon, it had gone off and killed deceased accidentally, then they would return a verdict of death by misadventure accordingly. In that case, how did they explain the conduct of the person, whoever it was, who had dragged the body to the door? The coroner then passed on to speak of the law concerning manslaughter. He reminded them that no mere words, however insulting or threatening, can be an efficient excuse for killing anybody, and that the conflict must be sudden and unpremeditated. Did they think, for example, that the Duke had gone out, wishing to induce his guest to return and sleep in the house, and that deceased had retorted upon him with blows or menaces of assault? If so, and the Duke, having a weapon in his hand, had shot deceased in self-defence, that was only manslaughter. But in that case they must ask themselves how the Duke came to go out to deceased with a lethal weapon in his hand, and this suggestion was in direct conflict with the Duke's own evidence. Lastly, they must consider whether there was sufficient evidence of malice to justify a verdict of murder. They must consider whether any person had a motive, means, and opportunity for killing deceased, and whether they could reasonably account for that person's conduct on any other hypothesis. And if they thought that there was such a person, and that his conduct was in any way suspicious or secretive, or that he had wilfully suppressed evidence which might have a bearing on the case, or, here the coroner spoke with great emphasis, staring over the Duke's head, fabricated other evidence with intent to mislead, then all these circumstances might be sufficient to amount to a violent presumption of guilt against some party, in which case they were duty-bound to bring in a verdict of wilful murder against that party. And in considering this aspect of the question, the coroner added, they would have to decide in their own minds whether the person who had dragged deceased towards the conservatory door had done so with the object of obtaining assistance, or of thrusting the body down the garden well, which, as they had heard from Inspector Crakes, was situated close by. If the jury were satisfied that deceased had been murdered, but were not prepared to accuse any particular person on the evidence, they might bring in a verdict of murder against an unknown person or persons. But if they felt justified in laying the killing at any person's door, then they must allow no respect of persons to prevent them from doing their duty. Guided by these extremely plain hints, the jury, without very long consultation, returned a verdict of wilful murder against Gerald, Duke of Denver. You have been listening to Part 1 of Clouds of Witness by Dorothy L. Sayre.